Dr. Bill. We obviously, this is the second time with us.
Sure.
And we really enjoyed the first podcast. It really kind of gave us a lot of insights as to what you do. And we wanted to see what you're up to heading into 2022. And also, too, I think there's probably a lot of listeners out there that are looking for some kind of direction, inspiration on, everybody has New Year's resolutions, the way they eat and exercise, their whole philosophy about, how they live their life. I think people are always looking for, something that they can use to improve. So you're a perfect guest for that. So why don't you tell us about the new book and what you have planned for 2022?
Awesome. Yeah. So the book released in the US a few weeks ago in November, and it's releasing in a whole bunch of other places in the world on actually in 2 weeks. So I don't know when this is actually airing, but January 19th, it'll release, and I'm super excited about it in a couple different languages. So it's called Eat Like a Human: Nourishing Foods and Ancient Ways of Cooking to Revolutionize Your Health. And really what it is essentially just an understanding, a comprehensive understanding of our ancestral dietary past, with a focus on all of the ways that our ancestors figured out technologies that they discovered to take the raw materials from our environment and transform them into their safest and most nourishing forms possible for our human bodies. And it's those very technologies that created us as a species, as humans. And I feel that it's those very techniques and technologies which are still very relevant today that we need to get back to create a baseline for human diet and health today. So the first piece of the book is a comprehensive understanding of our dietary past. And then every chapter is a different food sort of category or group, where I dive into the history and the prehistory of that particular type of food. So everything from grains to maize to dairy to animals to plants, and even weird sort of seemingly off the wall ingredients, but really relevant to us as humans, things like ash, earth, and charcoal, and even bugs. And the final chapter, which is the weirdest one of all for me, is all about sugar. And we take that and we understand the relationship between those foods and us as humans in our past. But most importantly, every chapter ends with a whole bunch of tips and recipes for how to take the lessons from that chapter and apply them in your home kitchen to nourish your family in the best way possible.
If I can just add in that the tips at the end of the chapter are great. I'm listening to it on Audible. So as I'm listening to the book, I was like, okay, I want to ask him this. I want to ask him that. So I'm jotting down all these notes. And then we get to the tips at the end and I'm like, okay, well, he just answered every single one of my questions that I had. So scratch that, start over. But I really like the tips at the end. I think that it encapsulates the whole chapter that you were just talking on. And like I said, just answers those few questions that might have been missed in the beginning of the chapter. So I really like that.
Well, that is wonderful to hear, Rachel. Thank you. Because the whole point of it is to make it accessible. I've spent so much of my life and my career diving down these rabbit holes and, specifics for stone tool technology and specific ways of detoxifying plants. And all this is wonderful from an intellectual level. But what I was really hoping for was to find a way to take that information and make it relevant to just, every day in a modern Western world. So actually around the world in general, but sort of a modern life. And I'm glad to hear that. Thank you.
Do you think that, in the United States, there's a lot of misinformation out there, not even in the United States, really around the world, just with how everybody absorbs so much from the internet and social media. And a lot of times I'm reading something maybe in a magazine at the grocery store on the cover. And sometimes you don't know if maybe there's a different agenda, that maybe this test was done and funded by an organization that's trying to get you to drink more of this or eat more of that. But in the United States, do you feel like there's, what do you feel like the general public probably doesn't really know a lot about as far as like with food? Do you think it's not really understanding the ingredients? Do you think that it's more the way that people cook? Like, what do you think is kind of the biggest where we can improve as citizens in the United States?
I think it's a combination of everything you mentioned and a few other factors. So it's not understanding the ingredients, not understanding where they came from, not understanding best practices for the actual growing or raising or harvesting of those foods and the shipping of them. But and those sorts of things have and continue to be addressed in a lot of different platforms, and a lot of the work that's being done is fantastic. The idea that we should be sourcing as locally and as fresh and as humanely and respectfully and ethically as possible is nothing new. Although I do try to reinforce that in the book. But what I think is missing, and we talked a little bit about this the last time we all spoke, what I think is missing from our modern kitchens and modern conversations around food and diet and health is the magic that happens in the kitchen. That idea that what we do in the kitchen is not just make something taste good. That's incredibly important, and smell good and look good. Those things are incredibly important. But just as importantly, or even more importantly, is we must do things to almost every ingredient in the world to get it ready for our human bodies to properly and safely and efficiently make use of the nutrition in those foods. And that's what we've been doing for millions of years. That's what we've been really doing very well for several 100,000 years. And that's what we're doing a really poor job of today. Food processing in the past was for safety and nutrition, and our ancestors did such a good job at that our bodies grew and our brains grew and our populations grew and we became human. But today we're processing food at the expense of those nutrients and the expense of the bioavailability for, in many cases, and you mentioned it, so almost solely for profit. And when we do that, we're in big trouble. We've created today and we said this last time too, the first time ever in the history of the planet, obesity and malnutrition in the same individual. That means the modern food industry is producing food that is so nutrient free that you can eat so much of it, you still become obese. And at the same time, you're still malnourished. And there's something really, really wrong with that. So to be a little bit more specific, to answer your question, I think there's a lot of misinformation, although it's getting better, around fat. I grew up in the 70s, and if fat entered the house, it was a demon, right? And if it did, it better come in the form of margarine or vegetable oil.
Right.
My God, we'd never have butter or God forsake lard or something like that. And finally, last year, the American Heart Association finally reversed and lightened up some of their understanding of restrictions on saturated fat, which is really a fat that helped make us human. It's been in our diets for 3.5 million years. And the other thing I think there's a lot of misinformation about is the role that I believe vegetables should play in our diet. Now, I love the way vegetables taste. I love the texture. I love the way they look on a plate. And it's true that vegetables have nutrition in them, and in some cases, really good nutrition in them. So those are all wonderful reasons to eat vegetables. And I think we should include vegetables in our diet. But the thing, and I start the chapter on plants off with a very simple but powerful sentence. I say, plants should scare the hell out of you. And they should. All plants on this planet have some level of toxin in them. And even if they have nutrition in them, they don't release that nutrition incredibly easily. That doesn't mean we shouldn't have vegetables in our diets, but we need to do things to certain vegetables to make them as safe and nourishing as possible. And they're very easy things that we can do in our kitchen. I hate any time we turn off our brains when we're thinking about food. Some people say, oh my God, it's exhausting to think about food all the time. And if this is good and this is bad, and calories and protein and all those sorts of things, I just want somebody to tell me what to eat and I just want to eat it. And that's a very dangerous thing. I mean, we're talking about the very thing that nourishes you and your family minimum 3 times a day for your entire life. We should put thought into it. In fact, it's wonderful that we have the opportunity to talk about, think about, and make selections and choose our food. So we should be thinking about it. And vegetables are a place where I think a lot of people just turn off their brains. They have this idea that some is good, more is better, and they just wholeheartedly, just start throwing it on their plates without thinking. And there's a lot of issues that are happening with us today that are a direct result of poor or overconsumption of certain vegetables.
So how do you approach people who might not be so open to this information. For example, after our last podcast, we talked about the toxins in potato skins.
Right.
So I tried to educate some people in my close vicinity on that, and I was like, no, we're going to remove the potato skins, and this is why, and everything. And they were very close-minded about it because we've been eating potatoes this way for so long and nothing's happened thus far. Look at us, we're fine. So how do you approach people who are maybe a little bit more close-minded on the subject?
It's, that's a really good question. I used to be very dogmatic and forceful about this information, and some of it is hard to hear, and it's hard to hear for a lot of different reasons. I don't know if I mentioned this last time, but I remember when I started, when I was first a professor, I was teaching at Temple University and then Monmouth University later in New Jersey, and I was teaching these 4 field anthropology classes, which means in one semester we teach everything from cultural anthropology to physical anthropology to linguistics and all sorts of things. We cover a whole range. It's like this, splattering of all sorts of different topics, all about humans, because that's what anthropology is. And every week was divided into a different topic, everything from human sexuality to family structure to politics to religion to language, all sorts of different things. And here I am in front of a group of 17 or 18-year-olds and from a bunch of different backgrounds, and addressing topics, and this is 20 years ago, which are very emotionally charged. And you would think that either maybe the human sexuality or family structure or politics conversation were going to be the hard ones, the ones where students resisted and got their backs up or whatnot. And it was actually the two that always, every semester, resulted in the most amount of controversy and students, some of them getting a little bit upset, was linguistics or language and food. And it's because both of those are everything about who we are, our religion, our politics, our socioeconomic status, our traditions, our family, all of those things are wrapped up in food and how we talk about the world around us. And it was really, really difficult to have a real conversation about food. And think about it, especially when we're talking about a generation, a young parent is a little bit more accessible than, for a couple of reasons, I think, than an older group that already have kids and already raised them. Because anytime you tell them something that might not be the way that they raise their family, they take it as a personal attack. Like, oh my gosh, I didn't, whether it's about breastfeeding or about whether you let your kids eat butter, all of a sudden they feel threatened and they feel attacked. So I backed off a lot. And I just think getting the information out there is important and letting somebody hear it. And what I found over the past 20 years is that even just planting a seed is incredibly important. And you can see those seeds flourish years or sometimes even a decade later, planting that seed in their mind. And then at the right moment, they're ready to accept that information. And I'll give you a great example, my own parents. And it's hard to hear things from somebody that's so close to you. But my parents, raised me in the 70s with that same sort of mindset. Margarine is good. Butter is good. They were listening to everything they were told. Lean meat is good. Cut all the meat off all the fat off your steak and those sorts of things. And when I started to gain a better understanding, or at least the same perspective that I have today, it was very hard for them to hear. And especially when I started talking about things like potato skins and the dangers with things like spinach. Heck, we grew up on spinach and kale. And God, that was, if we were going to be healthy, we were eating, a huge bowl of kale. And I planted a seed. We had a lot of conversations, not arguments, but heated discussions about it. And then I just let it sit. And about 2.5 years ago, I came in contact with a fantastic woman by the name of Sally Norton, who does work on oxalates in plants. She's amazing. And she's literally changing and saving people's lives with her work. And I interviewed her for something that I was doing. My parents listened to it. And after that interview, they completely transformed the way that they eat with regard to oxalates, and pains that my parents have been dealing with for literally their entire life went away in months as a result of it. And it wasn't the conversation that I had in the beginning. And it wasn't the Sally Norton one. It was a combination of all that. They were hearing things from me for a while, and then they were in a place to hear it from somebody else that maybe said it in a different way, and then it hit. The other problem is, what you said, Rachel, about people saying, "No, I'm absolutely fine. What are you talking about?" A lot of these problems are very, very slow and build over time. So it's hard to say this thing that I'm feeling is a result of that thing that I ate 5 years ago or eat every single week. But just as importantly, we have normalized not feeling well as a population. We've normalized pain when you're 40 years old. We've normalized your knees creaking when you walk up the steps, your feet hurting when you get out of bed. And, when we think that's normal, then all of a sudden we don't know any different. I had a guy in here. I'm at the food lab right now and the Modern Stone Age kitchen, and we had the fire inspector in this morning, and we were talking, and he was having a cup of coffee, and he said, "Have you ever heard of the GAPS diet?" The GAPS diet is an amazing diet, especially geared towards humans with special needs or with digestive issues. And it's really based around things like high quality bone broth and fermented vegetables and dairy and wonderful, wonderful things. I love it. And I said, "Oh yeah, absolutely." He said, this is him talking, about 10 years ago, he put himself and his whole family on it. And he said, all of a sudden, I knew that I finally knew for the first time that I wasn't feeling good. Like, I didn't know that I wasn't feeling good until I actually felt good. And for so many people in this world, they've never had a truly healthy, nourishing meal or day in their lives, and they don't know what that feels like. So arming somebody with that feeling, I think is the best way to then go ahead and have that. It's easier said than done, certainly, but it is a tall order. It really is.
Dr. Bill, a lot of people think of the word diet as they associate it with like weight management or trying to lose weight, but it's also really kind of refers to as like the kinds of food that a person or a community eats every day.
Sure.
So for people that didn't see our first podcast where we kind of really dove into the whole concept, can you explain what does a typical week look like for you and your family as far as like what your diet is? Like, what do you eat and how you prepare it? I think people would be interested to know that.
Sure. Well, yeah, I love the way you said that. The diet should not refer to a strict weight loss regimen or anything. Like, diet really refers to just the basic way that a family or a group or a community or a population eat, over a longer period of time. And if you think about it from that perspective, we're talking about lifestyle, not a 2-week or a 3-month plan, which is a much better way to think about it. In our family, and the way I approach this in general is, no matter what is in front of me, I want to make sure, and whether that's I'm at a restaurant with a menu, I'm at a dining hall, or I'm in my home kitchen, or maybe in a supermarket, to me, the best way to approach any given situation is to say, okay, listen, what in this particular instance, these are the choices that I have. What are my best choices for the food that I'm going to put into my body? And most importantly, or at least just as importantly, what can I do to that food to make it as safe and nourishing as possible? I mean, that is my goal. The other goal that I have, and I reach this goal if I do those things, is, and I might have mentioned this last time, every time you sit down to a table, you should eat a meal that is so nourishing that when you get up, you feel better than when you sat down. And it sounds so incredibly basic, but strange at the same time. What are we doing with that food? We're supposed to be nourishing ourselves. And when I mean nourishing ourselves, I mean biologically nourishing. We should be getting the most incredible nutrition in the best way possible into our mouths. And that sort of emotional, cultural nourishment that comes from the setting, who you're eating with, how you're eating. Are you slamming down food you got at Wawa off your dashboard as you're driving? Or are you sitting down with people that help you live your best life and people that you love? Two completely different situations. And true nourishment comes from the combination of all that. So with that said, we eat a lot of and high quality animal-based foods. We eat a ton of bone broth. We make sure we eat bone broth every single day. We eat high quality meats. We have organ meats in our diet at least 3 times a week. And when we eat vegetables, which we do regularly, they're specifically selected for different things, like I mentioned earlier. And we always do something to those vegetables to make them as safe and nourishing as possible. So for instance, fermentation is usually the default for most of them. So if we're eating something like cabbage, it's fermented. If we're eating carrots, it's fermented. We eat dairy on a regular basis. We have yogurt just about every day. We have kefir just about every day. Both of those are fermented dairy products. Cheese, we eat a good amount of traditionally made cheese, and we don't eat any industrial nut or seed oils whatsoever. They haven't been in our kitchen for a very long time. So we do have avocado oil, coconut oil, and olive oil. And we almost always use those for cold applications like dressings and mayonnaise and those sorts of things. And anything we cook with is high quality animal fat. They either butter or ghee or lard or tallow or schmaltz.
Dr. Bill, when you say high quality meat or high quality like fat animal fat content that you're adding to your diet, what do you mean by high quality?
That's an awesome question. So I mean several things, and part of this is, the answer to this question is ticking several different boxes or checking different boxes that I think are incredibly important. One is we want to make sure that the food going into our bodies is as nourishing as possible. It is also as ethical and sustainable as possible at the same time. So when I say high quality, I mean we've taken as many links out of the food chain as possible to access those animals. Ideally, a lot of the meat that we consume, and I know we're very lucky to be able to do this, a lot of it is hunted by me or my son, hunted or fished by us and butchered by us. If it's not, we know the farmer and the abattoir that have raised and killed those animals, and we do most of the butchering in our house. And in the occasion that we haven't done that ourselves, we actually know the butcher. And I know those are incredibly big asks for different people, depending on where they live in the world. And I'm very fortunate where I live now that all of those things are incredibly accessible. But the next step, from there would be to purchase as ethically and sustainably raised animals as possible. And if you don't know the farmer, you at least have enough information to know that that's what went into the life and the death of those animals. And buy the largest portion of that animal as possible. And that means there's less packaging and you have access to more of the nutrients. So in other words, if you can buy a whole chicken, do that instead of chicken breast. If you can buy a pork shoulder, that's better than just buying Boston butter or picnic or even just some ground up sausage. And those things aren't as difficult of an ask. I mean, you can get a high quality meat grinder for $79 to fit on your KitchenAid, and you can grind 5 pounds of meat in about a minute and a half. These may seem like big drastic steps, but by doing that, it's essentially you're in the long run saving money, and you're also supporting a more ethical and sustainable food system.
Right. So just going back to the beginning when you were talking a little bit about the whole, like how we lose the nutrients because of the process and everything, that many of the big companies are focusing more than the nutrients and more of the high quality product of the yield, so they get more money at the end of the day as a result. So how can I tell somebody that is like they want to have a better diet in their lifestyle to buy a whole chicken when the whole chicken is going to be, let's say, $15-20, and you're going to go, probably, let's say you're going to go to Costco, the rotisserie chicken is already $5, already ready to go. Or even if you go to, let's say, Walmart, you can buy the whole tray for, I don't know, $10 with 10 chicken breasts. So how can I tell them to go for more like, I mean, I know that saying knowing where your product is coming from is one of them, but at the same time, like, how can I tell them if you buy the whole chicken, it's going to be way better in the long term? Because if they don't have the resources to buy the whole chicken, of course, they're going to go for the cheapest one just to get something in their belly.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right, and it's a huge consideration because we are fortunate to be able to hunt, to have so many farms around us, and to be able to, afford some of these higher quality meats or access to this meat. And certainly that isn't the case across the board. And I completely understand that. So there's a couple of things. One is the average price in this country for boneless, skinless chicken breast is about, I think it's $3.25, $3.24 a pound, I think. And the average price for a whole chicken is $1.28 per pound. Now, I know that some of that weight is in skin and bones, not a lot, but a little bit. So you could then start to make the argument, well, I'm getting more meat in this way. But no, the reality is, if you buy that chicken breast, you have one meal. If you buy that chicken, you have the breast, you have the legs, you have the wings, you have the skin, you have the heart, the liver, and the gizzard on the inside. And then you have a carcass that's left over to make bone broth from at the same time. So to answer that question, it's a much larger piece. Like if we show somebody, and this is why I focused on the chicken in the animals chapter, because it's so very accessible. It's a package. It ticks many of my boxes that I think are important, where you can bring home the entire animal, and from a cultural and emotional and just human perspective, the people in your house, your kids, everybody get to see something that resembles an animal. They get to see skin, they get to see bones, they get to see guts, they get to hear what it's like when a knife scrapes against the bone, which is really important. And then it's also in a package that you can do something with without a whole bunch of equipment or a whole bunch of space.
Right. And so it basically is kind of like what you said at the beginning, like planting a seed and showing people, educating people how you can do so much with the whole product instead of like just one piece of the product. That at the end of the day is going to have more yield in not just one meal, but many of the other meals. And just as I mentioned that you were talking about planting the seed, I don't know if it was difficult or not. I don't have kids, but how do you manage to have your kids on the same page? Because usually, I mean, some of them, I know that they like to go the totally opposite. Like impressive. If you want to tell them like, oh no, this is what you have to eat because it's much better and whatever, they're going to try to go for hot dogs or something like, I want to go against my parents. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I hear you. And listen, I can sit here and have this conversation all day long and make it seem like it's rainbows and unicorns in our house and we're at one with the earth and we're running around barefoot hunting with stone tipped arrows and things. And that's certainly not the case. I mean, I don't want it to be that sort of Instagram where you only see the pictures of what's good. Listen, I will say we've been very fortunate that most of the work I've done anywhere in the world, my kids have been there with me, and they've seen so many and experienced so many wonderful things. But even with that, I wouldn't say they're on the same page as me. I mean, my kids right now are 18, 16, and 14. They spend a certain amount of time in the house with me and a whole lot of time outside with their friends and at school, and less than that with COVID. But anyhow, they're out in the, I guess, real world a lot more. It is a constant battle. I will tell you that when we put it's a lot easier when we put our foot down hard on something and the kids realize that we're not going to waver at all. Like, for instance, I don't think my kids have been at McDonald's since they were 5. Right? They know they know McDonald's and fast. I don't want to pick on McDonald's, but fast food chains like that are a no-go, and they don't even bring it up. But they will fight for things like ice cream during the week sometimes, or those sorts of things. And I'll tell you, if that's where my battles are right now, then I'm very, very happy.
Yeah.
Right. Like I mentioned earlier, I don't know if we talked about this last time, but there was a year about 12 years ago, 10, 12 years ago, that I took the entire year, and I was so adamant, I was so sure of what the way I thought I should feed my family, that I took the entire year, and there was nothing brought into our house and fed to my family that I didn't harvest or forage or prepare entirely myself. I made all the cheese, all the butter, all the bread, hunted the animals, did all of it for probably 95% of the food that we ate that entire year was all done like that. And I mean, I was so proud of myself. I patted myself on the back. I told everybody about it, but I realized that biologically we may have been at our healthiest, but emotionally the house was a complete disaster. I mean, the kids were screaming to eat junk food. Eating at our house was so incredibly stressful, and the amount of time it took to prepare it. Now, listen, it was a huge learning opportunity for me. I learned so much that year. But one of the biggest takeaways was that, like I mentioned earlier, sitting down at that table, true nourishment comes from a combination of biologically satisfying our nutritional needs and satisfying our emotional and cultural needs at the same time. And there needs to be a meeting place there. And if the kids are going to have ice cream or they're going to go get candy on Halloween, you know what? Great. That's absolutely fine. But the majority of our diet is like what I mentioned earlier. Our day-to-day is bone broth and fermented yogurt and sourdough bread and those sorts of things.
That's awesome. I just wanted to also just mention a little bit about the support that your kids have, because I think that the name is Rise, right? I was trying to find the bakery that you have, and that's something that you said before that your daughter created throughout the pandemic, and you were always supporting everything. And I just wanted to mention that I think that's great. I mean, you don't see all the parents supporting somebody like you said. I mean, the age that they are, it's like most of the parents are going to say like, they don't even know what they want, but you were supporting throughout the pandemic. And I've seen pictures and everything. The bread looks great, and everything that you have been doing, that they have been doing, it's great. And probably that motivation to get them like to connect better with you too.
Yeah, well, thank you. They are amazing, and I love. They have such a unique perspective on the world, and I think the dynamic of the five of us, my wife and our three kids together, really helps. We help ground one another. We help give all these different perspectives to one another, and what we're trying to land on. And this is really, between my wife and my technology is rooted in millions of years ago, and I'd be happy literally banging on rocks all day long. And she's sitting there on the computer doing her thing. And she pulls me out of the past in some really important ways. And I think this book is a large part of that. The idea that what what I'm doing needs to be meaningful and relevant to somebody, or else it's just a conversation, right? And that's where the book, that's where Rise and Modern Sunday Kitchen, all those things are stemming from that.
I also think what you're doing too is like, you kind of show them the principles of what you embrace. And, as they get older, they're going to make their decisions, but they've been exposed to things that otherwise they would not know. Like I made chocolate from scratch with my kids one time, and fermenting showing them like what chocolate looks like is like, that doesn't even look like anything anywhere even related to like a Hershey bar. But I was like, well, listen, we've got several days of work to do like in making this. But they, now they kind of have an appreciation of like making chocolate. Or when we do pumpkin pies, we'll go out and we'll get the pumpkins and show them how to make that. So I feel like the principles will last with the kids.
Hey, everybody, I want to take a second to say thank you to our sponsors. This show is brought to you by the following partners. Meat and Bone. These guys are just doing an exciting thing in the Miami and Florida area. Check out their website. They offer premium quality meats hand delivered to your door if you live in the Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach area. But also they ship nationally, and you can also visit them at some of their boutique locations in the Florida area. These guys came up to our recent barbecue class, and they brought all sorts of amazing cuts of meat, steaks, brisket. Listen, if you're looking for quality steaks like you would get in a restaurant, check these guys out. They've got some incredible selection and top-notch quality. Check out their website. Also, Ovention Oven. These ovens are just incredible. We've used these during the pandemic. They really helped us kind of pivot and reposition ourselves so that we were able to expand our menu without having to make expensive investments in the kitchen. These ovens offer an innovative solution to restaurant operations, opening up a whole new realm of possibilities with your menus. The Ovention ovens are ventless, they're fast, and operationally friendly in cooking. What we do is we program our recipes in the oven, and our cooks just press a button of the image of what they're going to cook. It's a whole new way of cooking. Check out their entire line of Ovention ovens. And of course, Steelite. Steelite International. has remained an incredible partner of Rosendale Collective. They are an internationally world-leading manufacturer of award-winning inspirational dinnerware for the international hospitality industry. They've been a longtime partner of Rosendale Collective, and they're getting ready to sponsor us with some incredible tableware for our new section on Rosendale Online, and we can't wait to see what they're going to come up with. Also, check out DryAger. DryAger offers a level of unprecedented quality for both restaurant and home dry aging programs. They make the most amazing dry aging meat cabinets in the industry. They are designed with sophisticated technology. They're made in Germany, and you can get incomparable taste of restaurant quality steak in the comfort of your own home. Thanks again to our following sponsors: Meat and Bone, Ovention Oven, Steel Light International, and DryAger. Now, back to the show.
One question, well, actually two. One was going to be, we really got into dry aging over the last year. We're working with a company in Germany called DryAger. And I'm curious to know if you do any aging of any of the meats. I mean, maybe, we've seen before where some of the items are going to get more tender and develop more flavor. So I'm curious if you do any aging with any of the meats. And then also bone broth is a big one. I'm curious to hear any tips or how you make any of your broths. Like, what do you put in it? Do you keep it very simple? Do you let it cook for a certain amount of time? Is there any kinds of bones or animals that yield a better product? Because I know that's another one of those buzzwords out there where or ingredients where people are like bone broth. And then, I've seen them in the local Wegmans, but, you can make it at home, and I think a lot of people that would really pique their interest.
Yeah. And you should make it at home. Absolutely. So let me go over the bone broth one first. We literally just 2 weeks ago started launching bone broth here at the Modern Stone Age Kitchen, and people are really excited about it. And I'm so excited that they're excited about it. So there's stock, there's broth, there's meat broth, there's bone broth, and there's a ton of overlaps with all of these things. Typically, when somebody's talking about, there's not a huge consensus on this, but typically when somebody's talking about bone broth, we're talking about obviously bone being the most important part, the greatest quantity of what's going into the mix. But you're also making sure to capitalize on joints, cartilage, connective tissue. I always, and I know this is going to sound really strange potentially, but no matter what kind of bone broth I'm making, I am always throwing feet in there, always, right? So if it's chicken bone broth, there's chicken feet. If it's pork bone broth, there's pig's feet. If it's beef, and it's very easy, believe it or not. I don't know if people have seen it at the store. You can get beef or calves feet very, very easily. And if you get them, they should be cut up to release the collagen. Goose, deer, whatever it is, the feet are actually going in there. And one of the reasons for that is because the hands, if nobody knows what your hand looks like without the skin on it, then Google it and take a look. There are a ton of bones in your hands, a ton of connective tissue, and that collagen is what really, not only is it incredibly nourishing, but it's what makes that bone broth be like jello or gelatin. Your bone broth, when it comes out of the fridge, you should be able to shake it, and it's not a liquid. It's closer to jello than it is a liquid. So all that's always getting thrown in. And when I make it, I do keep it very, very simple. So I throw all that in, and if it's typically with poultry, it's just the entire carcass or the bits of flesh, whatever, all that's going in unroasted. However, anytime that I roast a chicken, I take the carcass and I throw it right in the freezer because I'll just throw all that in, at the time. If it's red meat, I'm typically roasting the bones, and you really want to get as many different bones from different parts of the animal as possible. Everything from, again, feet or joints are amazing, neck bones, whatever it is, they're all going in. And I typically am roasting the red meat bones first for color and for flavor. All the bones will go into a pot, cover them with cold water by about 1 inch or 2, and then throw a splash of raw apple cider vinegar in there and let it sit for a half an hour to an hour. And that raw apple cider vinegar will help draw particularly the minerals out of the bones and put them, it'll be a more nourishing bone broth at the end. Wow. Then I turn the heat up, bring it to a boil, skim it, and let it simmer for anywhere from 12 to 48 hours. And that's another.
I'm sorry to interrupt. The apple cider vinegar you put in when the water's cold and you just let it sit off.
Just let it sit off, right? Cold water.
Wow.
Throw a splash apple cider vinegar. Some people say a little bit of a pinch of salt helps as well. So there's some people that will throw on a splash apple cider vinegar, and you won't taste the vinegar at the end. We're talking about a splash,
right?
And then a pinch of salt. Let that sit with the heat off in cold water for a half an hour to an hour. Then turn it on, skim it, and then hit it at a simmer for 12 to 48 hours. And one of the differences between bone broth and many other types of broth is the amount of time that it's cooking. And we want that amount of time to draw out not only the flavor and the color, but also the minerals, the enzymes, and the fat. Now there's fat. I mean, you'll see the fat, right? There's fat on the outside. There's fat inside the bones in the form of marrow. And there's fat actually inside of the matrix of the bone itself called bone grease. All that comes out, all that populates the bone broth, all that adds to flavor. And at the very last hour or 2 hours of cooking, if I'm going to throw any vegetables in, I throw it in then. If you put an onion and a carrot and a piece of celery in and then boil or simmer that thing for 48 hours, it's going to be so incredibly bitter at the end, you're not going to want to eat it. So take those, if you're putting carrots or celery or onions in there, throw that in the last hour. If you're going to put parsley or something in, throw that in the last 15 minutes to a half an hour. And then when I fill my jars with it, I do several things. One is I make sure, so many people that want to take it, separate it, take the fat, put it over here and have this. Look, keep the fat in it for a couple of reasons. One is nutritional, one is for flavor, but also I fill my mason jars, cap them, and turn them upside down for about 5 minutes. And it is incredibly hot broth going in there. I'm not canning it, right? But what I am doing is that incredibly hot broth is helping kill anything that's in there. I've increased the shelf life from a week to about 3 weeks to a month by doing that. Turn it upside down and then cool it down as fast as possible. One thing that we need to keep in mind with really high quality bone broth is that it is so nutrient rich. It's nutrient rich to us, but it's also nutrient rich to all sorts of bad pathogens. If we take that really good bone broth and cool it down too quickly and it takes too long through that danger zone to do so, you could have some bad things happening. So I let that sit upside down for about 5 minutes, turn it right side up, and then stick it directly in the fridge. And plus, if I've taken that hot bone broth and divided it into those, into smaller sections, it'll cool off a lot more rapidly. And I always you have that fat layer on the top, and I usually have about a 1/4 inch of fat on the top of my bone broth. That also helps seal it as well.
Interesting. Well, there's actually a lot of parallels to what you're saying. And from the chef side, whenever I was at the Greenbrier, I remember going down and tasting all the sauces from the apprentices, and they'd watch what is he looking for? And I would take the jus, and I would kind of just take my ladle, and I wanted to see the viscosity of it. Yeah. And there were things that you were looking in that sauce to see and you could troubleshoot. If it looked like it was too thin, I would say, oh, well, this is because the stock wasn't made properly and they didn't extract all the collagen and the gelatin that really kind of gave the sauce that natural viscosity. And really, there is a lot of truth to, the nourishment part of it, and how people always say that those soups and bone broth kind of nourishes the soul. It helps with the cold, but it does fill you up. I mean, it's rich, and there's that gelatin and that collagen, the viscosity of it. It's very satisfying to eat. And I remember we used to make these huge batches of stock, 500 pounds, 700 pounds of veal bones we would cut every day. And that's exactly what we would do, is we would add either calf's feet or pig's feet, or we would add chicken feet as well. And it really did make a big difference. So that's really fascinating to hear that you're doing that. And I can picture just the appearance of those broths. And that's a long time too. Wow. 12 to 48 hours. I mean, that's impressive.
That was a great class. That was
going to be one of my questions. Is you make these bone broths, you ferment all these foods, you're hunting, you're publishing a book, you're teaching classes, where do you find the time? Where do you find the time to do all of this stuff
How
at
long do
your
you
house?
sleep every day?
Yeah.
I have the most amazing wife on the planet. You have no idea how much work she does to help make all this happen. Chris, that's a really good question, because that is one thing that I need to work on is sleep.
4
I'm
hours?
sleeping. What's that about 4 or 5, and at the most, and it's a huge problem. What's really fascinating, I think my wife talks about this all the time, is once I talk about a lot of things in the book and in my classes, fermenting dairy and making kefir and butchering and allowing, what making cheese, whatever it is. All these things do take time, but many of them, not the butchering one, but many of them, whether it's sourdough bread, whether it's fermenting vegetables, or whether it's, making cheese or kefir or yogurt or whatever, most of the work is done by trillions of bacteria and yeasts when I'm doing something else. And the key is, if you understand the process, and I know you guys know this, but if you understand the process and how to control different variables like time and temperature and humidity and all that, and you get into a routine, we're really talking about a little bit of time every single day that you work into your routine. You refresh the kefir, you put the yogurt on, you refresh the sourdough mother, whatever it is. And even though our sourdough bread takes almost 3 days to make, my active input into a loaf of bread is probably a total of about 15, 20 minutes, right? So, but it's spread out over such a long period of time. And so that's number one. And the other one is, if you understand how to control those variables, you can make those processes work around your schedule, or you can slow down the fermentation or speed it up a little bit, or make a couple of different things happen by controlling some of those. And it's really just about, again, that understanding and that connection with it. And one of the things that I love about things like fermentation is you are not only relying on, and this is going to sound kind of hokey, but bear with me, please. You're not only relying on these trillions of different bacteria to do this amazing work. It's transforming the health, it's transforming the flavor and the texture, but you're forming a relationship with them, and it's a symbiotic relationship. And it's a powerful relationship. There was a study done, and we might have mentioned this last time, where I think everybody knows it's sourdough bread from different places, because it's a wild bacteria and yeast, and there's different populations of bacteria and yeast and strains in different parts of the world, that you can make the same bread in Paris, San Francisco, and New York City the same exact way, and it's going to taste a little bit different, have different characteristics because of those different populations of wild bacteria and yeast. So there was a study done a few years ago where they looked at sourdough bread from different bakeries, and they wanted to see if they could actually isolate and find out what bakery each loaf of bread came from. And they could. But what was fascinating was it got down to the baker. They could tell which baker made that bread because of the bacteria that came from their hands into that bread, which wow. I think is a beautiful thing. But the reverse was true too. The sourdough bread impacted the bacterial colonies on the skin of the baker. It was a symbiotic relationship back and forth. I mean, that's what food is about. That's what terroir is about, right? And that's what tradition is about. And you can do that in your own kitchen, and you can celebrate those things. And part of it's health, and part of it's just that amazing connection.
That's amazing.
You mentioned sourdough and bread, and that's like my sister was here over the holidays, and she was like, "Oh, I want to pick up a loaf of sourdough bread from your bakery," and we just started talking about bread, and it's like one of those things that it's really kind of gotten a bad rap over the last several years, like bread in general. But people were like, "Oh, I got to watch carbs and I can't eat any bread," but they're not eating the bread like what you're talking about. People are going out to the grocery store and they're getting stuff that is just so processed, and it's really almost like, dead food. There's no origin of like what you're talking about, like the bakery and all of those microorganisms that go into impacting the taste and the bacteria, all that stuff, even just like with beer and wine and the fermentation. All that stuff is like, you lose some of that in food, the more processed that it gets.
Yeah, and you talk about that a lot in your book too, about in the grains chapter, you discuss about the processed breads and everything like that, which Rose, a question for me. As Chef Rich just mentioned, like sour beers and sourdoughs. Have you ever attempted a fermented pasta dough?
Yes, and we're actually launching it next week. We're doing
nice.
we're doing a sourdough pasta, and it goes through the full fermentation process, and it's literally fully fermented grains and egg yolks. So that's it, and it's wonderful. In
what
fact,
does it taste like? Can you tell? Is it taste at all different than just like regular semolina durum wheat flour? Can you tell?
Barely. And here's the thing. And this is something that I actually learned about after I finished the book. And I was down in Oaxaca a couple months ago I was teaching a fermentation workshop on fermenting offal, believe it or not. But the entire thing is Ferment Oaxaca. It's an event that happens every year. And oh my God, such amazing people were there. And there was a baker from Monterrey, Mexico. He owns 3 sourdough bakeries in Monterrey. The guy's amazing, Bernardo. And we were having a lot of discussions about everything he does is sourdough. And, I keep such control over pH for my fermented vegetables and obviously my fermented meats and my fermented dairy, but I really haven't paid a whole lot of attention to my pH in sourdough bread. And he doesn't, he walks around all day, literally in his pocket with a small pH meter that's made specifically for bread. I actually just got one last week. And a couple things that I think are really fascinating. One is he controls the pH back and forth to achieve different goals. He brings even just with bread. So he'll bring the pH down low enough to clean out, literally get rid of any potentially bad bacteria. And then when he adds other ingredients back in, it'll raise that pH back up just enough that it's not too sour for your palate, but it's a transformed food. Wow. The other thing that I thought was, and this changed our baking here. As you know, if you're trying to make something like a cake or a muffin or even pasta, you don't want something with a high gluten content. You don't want it to act like bread. You want bread to be like bread, cake to be nice and crumbly, or pancake or whatever. And this is what I didn't know, and this is going to change your baking, guys. I wish I knew about it when I wrote the book. If you drop the pH below 4, it activates an enzyme that breaks down the gluten, literally breaks the gluten apart. So if you drop it below 4, you can make muffins, pancakes, cakes, and they will have a cakey texture, which is in my mind amazing. So he brings it down below 4, and then when he adds the rest of the ingredients in, it's done its work, and then it raises that pH back up to where it's pleasant for us to eat it, but wow, that texture is completely transformed.
Oh, that is so cool.
Yeah.
Baking really is, and I kind of know this just from like starting off in my first apprenticeship. I started off in the pastry kitchen and baking, and you really kind of refer to the recipes almost as like formulas in a kitchen, because they really are like, there's so much more of a science in baking than there is any other aspect in the kitchen, I think. But that's really fascinating. It makes me want to try it. That's pretty cool.
Now, and just for everybody listening too, because you mentioned about the store sourdough bread, I talk about this in the book some, and we might have talked about it before, but I want to make sure I mention it. It's incredibly important. There is no regulation for calling, something doesn't have to meet a certain standard to be called sourdough. You can call anything sourdough. It doesn't even have to be sourdough. And in fact, most of what you would find in the grocery store is not sourdough. It is a regular yeasted bread where, for some reason, people think sourdough has to taste sour, and it doesn't. We're making sourdough croissants here, and there isn't a hint of sourness in them. But instead of using technology to make that bread as safe and nourishing as possible, they're using technology to make it taste sour to trick the consumer into thinking they're getting something that they're not. It's marketing, 100%. So the key is, if you go into a grocery store or any place that's selling bread, and it says sourdough, turn it over. And if it has anything sour on the label, if it says citric acid, acetic acid, vinegar, lactic acid, turn it over and put it back. All they've done is made a yeasted bread and added a hint of sourness to it to make you think you're eating sourdough bread.
Wow.
Right. But it's easy enough to make at home. And if not, there's plenty of bakeries around that are doing a wonderful job making sourdough bread to get it from there. But if you're truly looking for sourdough bread, stay away from a grocery store or a big box store. It's very difficult. It's almost impossible to find it.
Quick question about the sourdough. I know that throughout the pandemic was a whole like hype about like making it, learning a little bit. And just like the entire internet, not everything is reliable. I got a couple of friends that they got me sourdough. I can say the name of the chef, but they said that it was 100 years old and more. Yeah. Do you think that that's really, because I know that when it comes to tradition and everything, people like feel like really like they have a pride on it. Like this is what we have been taking care of for over 100 years throughout generation and generations. But does it really change the flavor, like from something that you make the last 2 months or the last 50 years and 100 years?
No. So you hit it the nail right on the head. So that connection, that human element, taking care of something for so long, that tradition is incredibly important. But the reality is, and there was another great study done about, man, this is almost 10 years ago, and I wish I knew the name of the study. It was a woman, I think she was an archaeologist, actually took different sourdough mothers from around the world, from France and San Francisco, the major places where sourdough is made, and brought them into new locations and continued to maintain them in a different location. And it was only a matter of several weeks that the local population of bacteria and yeast took over. So you can buy a sourdough mother from Paris. You can buy it right on the store. Cultures for Health sells it. You buy it, bring it in, and if you're, in Chestertown, Maryland, in a month, even if I started with that, just by feeding it and the bacteria and yeast that are in the air and on the flour that I'm using, turn it into what it would have been if I had just started it myself from scratch.
Become local.
So become local. So 150-year-old sourdough mother is incredibly cool, but there's no particular health benefits from that are better than something else. And if you got, Alaska is a great place. Alaska, because of the gold rush, people are taking sourdough mother cultures up there and maintaining them. And there's a lot of really old sourdough mother cultures in Alaska. If you get a 100-year-old sourdough mother from Alaska and bring it to Chestertown, Maryland, in a month, it's going to be like I had just started it myself here. So wow. It's super cool, but there's not a sort of terroir health benefit from it.
Well, Dr. Bill, I know we're coming up here on the hour, so we probably have time for maybe a few more questions with everybody. And then we want to hear my question, where can we find out more about some of the products that you mentioned? I mean, are they available on your website, the book? Where can people find out more about you and some of the products that you mentioned?
All right. So my website is eatlikeahuman.com. There's a ton of information about the book and about the online classes that we offer. And then modernstoneagekitchen.com is our website and the name of our building here and our business where we're producing these foods. And you can also find out a lot of information about the other products that we offer and our classes as well. And I just want to real quick mention a super cool class that we have starting February 1st. So there's a 2-month, intensive course that's focused on literally that book. In this space in the Modern Stone Age Kitchen, we've made that book come alive, and we're producing the food that we talk about in the same way that we write about in the book. And what we've done is we've taken it literally chapter by chapter, and every week there's discussions, behind the scenes stories. There's a lot of people, as Rachel knows, that we meet throughout that book from around the world. We're going to have a lot of those people on for conversations and Q&A, and then there'll be cooking demos for a lot of the recipes in that book. So it's sort of like a book club on steroids. That's going to start on February 1st. I really am just, what I'm passionate about is making, again, this as relevant and as meaningful as possible. And sure, I hope people find that book entertaining and informative. But what I hope more than anything is that it can actually make a difference in the lives and the kitchens and the families of the people that are actually reading it. So that starts on February 1st, and we can find all that information out on both of the websites.
And is this class is coming up February 1st? Is this available virtually or is this only?
It's all virtual.
It's all
virtual.
Like the new Rachel.
The new reality. Catch up, Rachel. Oh my gosh. Okay. And then my last question for you is,
sure,
what are your upcoming plans this year? Will I see you in Calabria? I head out tomorrow.
No, you don't. Do you?
Yes, I do. So by the time this episode airs, I will be back home in Calabria at the Italian Culinary Institute. So do you have any plans to travel this year? What's it look like in your future?
I have a couple conferences coming up. I'll be in San Diego speaking in April, and then in Austin in July. I'm super excited. I'm trying to set up the research associated with this. I'll be in Norway in October.
Wow.
My bucket list is to work with the Sami, the reindeer herders of northern Scandinavia, who probably of anybody in the world use more of the reindeer. I mean, they're like 98% of reindeer ends up as food. It's incredibly important. So I'm hoping to pair that together. But no,
that's cool.
If Calabria can make it in the plans, I'd be 100% on that. I'd love to
I'd love to see you there.
That's
absolutely
amazing.
And also one more quick plug: we do have a storefront here in Chestertown. Anybody that's anywhere near Philadelphia, DC, New York, Baltimore. We're only a couple hours away, and I'd love to see you here. We have a lot of really cool things happening here, and I always like in person as much as possible.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
And for any listeners who have not yet purchased Dr. Bill's book, you can get it on Amazon. I have it on my Audible, so I've been listening to it, and I wanted to send you a message and let you know that I love the live audio clips that are in the book. I just think that adds an element to this book that obviously you don't get when you read it. But it just, I think it takes the book to a whole nother level. And just again, congratulations on your book. It's a really great read. And for our listeners who haven't read it yet, make sure to check it out.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. It's always a pleasure to talk to you all.
Yeah, absolutely. And we wish you all the best of luck in 2022. And I'm looking forward to seeing you in person, hopefully this year. And, we always enjoy talking with you, and congratulations on the book, Dr. Bill. Thanks again.
Thank you so much.
You guys have a great day.
Thanks, Dr. Bill. See ya.
Thank you.